supply chainers, wherever you are in the world. This is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey with you today. Are you ready? Let's talk supply chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thoughts and Coffee. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, the Blended podcast, and the founder of the Blended Pledge. And we have a super exciting episode. We're going to be talking about space. We're going to be talking about supply chain. We've got an SpaceXer that's going to be on the show today. Her name is Nicole, and she's the head of supply chain at Northwood, and she will be joining me up on stage in just a minute. But before we do that, let's talk about our show sponsor. If you have not headed over to 𝐓𝐡𝐶historyofsupplychain.com, head over there. Take a look at our membership groups. We want to have you in there. We are a community filled with so much amazing information and conversations. We're connecting you virtually, and we're having some virtual and in-person events as well. So head over to 𝐓𝐡𝐶historyofsupplychain.com and make sure you sign up today. Now, if you are in the audience, we want to hear from you. So let us know in the comments where you are tuning in from. And if you like the conversation, let's see those fire emojis, because you know I like a fire emoji. Anyways, let's get to what's happening on Let's Talk Supply Chain right now. So we've got a brand new episode wherever you listen or watch the show. Hopefully it's over on Let's Talk Supply Chain YouTube channel, but it's episode 468. And I got a chance to sit down with Procurement IQ to talk about how we make intelligent purchases driven by data. Now, we talked about all sorts of things, and it's a great conversation. So again, wherever you check out the podcast, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, it's also over on our LinkedIn page. So go and check that episode out. Now, live tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern. This is a do not miss event. We are going to be live streaming Supply Chain Unfiltered, hosted by Christine Barnhart of 𝐓𝐿𝐿ogy, with her guest Conrad, who is the EVP over at Kinaxis, and they're talking about unlocking new routes in modern supply chain. So definitely don't miss that. Go and click the attend button so you don't miss a thing. All right. And again, on Friday, we are going live, or Eric Johnson is going live. He's going to be hosting TPM today, talking about trade chaos, shifting tariffs, tech spending. How are shippers adapting? I think the question is, how is everyone navigating through some of this chaos? Well, you're going to find out on Friday. Make sure to click the attend button so that you don't miss a thing. And then this afternoon, I am heading to Nashville, and I'm going to Home Delivery World. That's right. They have moved from Philadelphia to Nashville this year, and I'm going to be on stage tomorrow morning with Fabletics and Tractor Supply Company. We are going to be opening up the event with the keynote, and we're going to be talking about how they are managing their last mile delivery, but also the innovation that they have there as well. And then we're going to be opening it up for audience questions. This is going to be a really, really fun way to start Home Delivery World. And if you're there, come and see me. We've got a Woman in Supply Chain dinner on the Wednesday night, and would love to have you there as well. So reach out to me and I can send you the link. Where else are we going to be? Well, we're going to be at TMSA Elevate June 8th and 10th in Austin, Texas. Madison from my team is going to be there, and she's actually doing a really, really cool session there as well. Well, that's it for us. We've got lots going on, so let's bring up Nicole. Hello, Nicole. How you doing?
Hello. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you're in California. Thanks for getting up so early for us.
No, I'm up early anyways. This is good.
I love it. So for those of our audience that don't know who you are, tell us who you are, what you do, maybe a little bit about your day as head of supply chain at Northwood.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Nicole Callihan, head of supply chain at Northwood. We're based in Torrance, California. I'm based in Long Beach. And a little on my background, I have 12 years of supply chain leadership experience. My background has all been in the manufacturing space, from aerospace to automotive, renewable energies as well.
Awesome. Awesome. And I think you did a stint at SpaceX. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was at SpaceX for about 5 years. Definitely no place like it. And I think I've run into pretty much any supply chain problem you could run into. With space, it's interesting because you're designing and building at the same time, and pretty much every launch is critical in its own way. So there's always some kind of demand problem, shortage, crisis, something on fire that we're trying to quickly avert.
Which is really interesting because a lot of supply chain professionals are going through a lot of that right now, or have been going through that over the last couple of years. But in space logistics or space supply chains, I think that it is kind of, your go-to. It's kind of like what your day-to-day is going to look like no matter
Yes,
what.
and you become like addicted a little bit to that firefighting environment.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to give a shout out. We've got Steve, we've got Heather, we've got Jeffrey over on my personal, Jeffrey from Atlanta, Steve from Miami. Well, thanks for joining us. We've got a great conversation that we are going to have today. But first, let's get to our poll of the week. So we ask everybody a question every single Wednesday morning across our Let's Talk Supply Chain LinkedIn page. Now, we got a little bit crazy with this one. We haven't really done a question like this in the past, but everybody seems to like it because we've got 217 votes on this one. We've got one day left for this. So if you want to go and weigh in and be part of the conversation, head over to the link in the comments so that you can do just that. So the question was, can India replace China in supply chain leadership? Well, 46% of you said not yet, still behind. 24% of you said yes, fully capable. 19% said no, China still leads. And 11% said as a regional partner. Now, this is an interesting question because we're going to be talking more about this in the second article that we're going to be talking about today. And also, I talked about this on a Thoughts and Coffee just a couple of weeks ago in a few different ways. One was that Apple had moved their manufacturing to India, and they're going to actually be manufacturing 50% of their iPhones out of India because of tariffs. And so they think that, or at least in that scenario, they're able to utilize their manufacturing in China to take over some of that manufacturing or India to take over some of that manufacturing in China. Nicole, what did you think about this? And we want to hear from you in the comments. So let us know what you think about this as well.
No, I really like the question. I voted not yet, still behind. Definitely considering like geopolitical risks, tariffs, people are wondering like, where do you move your supply chain? I don't necessarily think it's one country that will completely overtake China in that dominance area. Like immediately, I would think Vietnam, Mexico. But I do think India has the highest potential long term to overtake China. I would say that China did so much investment in building up infrastructure to get to the point where they are, and it took decades to do that. I would say India has been able to get there more rapidly, and there's a lot of investment flowing into India too. I have purchased parts from India in the last couple of years, and it takes a higher amount of like operating overhead, which does offset any kind of some of those cost savings that you're seeing. But I do think they have the potential to get there, just not quite yet.
Well, and it takes a little bit more time as well to get here. From what I remember from my ocean freight days, I think it takes a little bit longer. But Mike in the comments and I were on the same page because he was talking about iPhone manufacturing in the comments as well, and said that if we manufactured it in the US, each piece would cost $3,500. I was recently on Bloomberg and I had mentioned that article as well. And the host was like, $3,500? I have 3 iPhones in my house. That means I would spend $10,000 just on iPhones. And then Cheyenne says the question inherently assumes manufacturing will not move to the US. Well, stay tuned because our second article today talks all about this and how nearshoring could potentially be the essential fight for the future. But we're going to get to that in just a minute. Before we do, now, Nicole, this is part of the show, or this part of the show is about the market update. So we want to hear from you, like, what's keeping you up at night? What are you talking to your teams about? What are you talking to other leaders about? What does supply chain look like for you?
For on my side in the space industry at Northwood, we're a growing startup, and I'm actually like creating a supply chain from the ground up. just implemented our first ERP system and really scaling up our suppliers. For us, it's like who can do quick short term, who can we also partner with long term, like long term preferred pricing that's more economical over time. Getting our teams involved early in the front end with engineering, so we have design for manufacturability, avoid some of these like long term supply chain issues we might see later down the road. But I would say just with the economic climate right now, I'm seeing suppliers like more hesitant to make investments, to sign into long-term scenarios, as they're kind of waiting to see what happens. Even for us, it's when talking with vendors, where should they manufacture? They're giving us kind of the whole table of all their plants and what could potentially fit, and as they still evaluate what scenarios would work best, considering tariffs and where they may be moving and investing more.
So, and I think that might be a little bit of forced diversification, right? We've been talking about diversifying our supplier base for the reason in the fact that they might not be able to produce the raw materials, the components, the things that we need. But what you're saying is that because it's uncertain, it might be forced diversification because you might have to look elsewhere if they're not willing to do that long-term commitment with you.
And then the other thing that I think a lot of companies are evaluating is if the supply base is so unstable or there's a lot of uncertainty there, what do you just do in-house and control yourself? And you control more of your own destiny that way.
Right. And I think a lot of I think a lot of companies are toying with that right now, right? We're talking a lot about supply chain design. What does that look like? What do we want our supply chains to look like? Where do we want to spend our risk dollars? I mean, these I think are all of the conversations or the questions that are top of mind for a lot of supply chain leaders right now.
And I would say in the space industry too, one of the things is you're rapidly iterating. And there is a lot of change as far as the design goes. So it doesn't always make sense to stockpile and hold more of the parts if there could be that change, because you're buying at risk essentially.
Absolutely. Now, we are going to get into an article about supply chains and space, which I think is totally fascinating. Given your background with SpaceX, can you talk to us a little bit about the state of space as it is right now and what actually is space supply chains?
Yeah, I would say with SpaceX has changed the space industry forever. I would say it's commercialized it, and it's enabled the cost of launch to get payload up to be significantly lower. So because of that, there's so many more little startup companies that have come out that's now launching their own payloads, and it's exciting to see kind of where other SpaceXers have ended up and the new businesses that have formed out of that. But it's a very much like a growing dynamic industry, and it's only going to continue to grow. I think in some of the articles we'll discuss, there is a new space economy. People are manufacturing in space. Our communications are very reliant on satellites in the sky. Our military is dependent on satellites in the sky. And maybe life will eventually be up there as well. So it's definitely exciting times on the space side.
Well, and I think, okay, so you mentioned the word payload. What does that mean exactly? Just in case. I mean, I don't really know what it means, so I just want to ask you.
Yeah, so if on a launch vehicle, your payload could be a capsule full of humans, like a Dragon capsule. Your
Okay.
payload is typically inside a fairing would be your satellite. And with SpaceX, they have like different buses where it could be lots of different satellites, lots of different customers launching at once, which lowers the cost. You could also have $1 billion satellite. You could have multi-million-dollar satellites. So for some of those customers who own the payload, it's very important for them to be able to precisely and accurately get their satellite launched on time. And depending on where it's going in the sky, there could be certain windows, very small windows, where you could potentially launch to get it to the right place in orbit.
Whew. Talk about, stressful. Anyways, let's get to our first article. So this article is about space supply chain gaps, which I thought was perfect for this conversation. Now, I think what we're talking about in this particular article to get us started is that the space architecture is based around satellites currently, right? It's not like we have established any sort of manufacturing facilities on a planet. I mean, you said there's manufacturing in space, so I'm interested in that. But really what this talks about is how I think supply chain is supporting space and some of the barriers, right? It's supporting the things that are going into space. It's supporting space missions in a variety of different ways that I don't even think we necessarily think about unless you're in that specific position. So, Nicole, what did you think of this article? Was there anything that sort of stood out for you?
I like to see that it was calling out that these are major pain points and that supply chain is a critical factor in resolving them at high levels of the military, that this is something that's keeping people up at night. And you can see that there's key groups that are just underserved, and we haven't built up the supply base domestically, and they see that as kind of a hindrance for our stability as a country if we don't have that capability in-house.
Yeah, and I just want to point out this particular quote from the director of credit program at the Pentagon's Office of Strategic Capital. They said, mapping the supply chain is hard stuff. Well, we as supply chain professionals, I think we know that. But now that more people are coming into supply chain, it's kind of nice to know that, they're resonating with that. So some of the barriers that they're talking about in here to space supply chains is production. And production of basic electrical and computer components, which are essential to obviously launching satellites or really anything into space. They're saying that it's getting very costly because if they're not able to get some of these components, they're having to redesign the actual product itself, whether that's satellites or what have you. And they're having to redesign it because of supply chain problems. So some of the supply chain issues are causing funding issues because it takes a lot of money to create that in the first place. And now if there's supply chain challenges, they're having to redesign it, which is costing a crap ton of money. Like, what do you think about that, Nicole?
Yeah, I've definitely heard redesign before. That's like an absolute last resort, and typically there's not the time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely encourage engineers to try to design for alternates where we can, so that we could sub something out if we had to. But with electronic components, a lot of those are coming out of China, Taiwan, and there's not a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, it did mention.
We try to design for it on our end to have parts that are more readily available, have lower lead times, have less geopolitical risk there. But on some parts, you're kind of handicapped there.
Well, yeah, and it talks about the reliability of suppliers. So you talked about reliability of suppliers in your current role at Northwood. There's a variety of companies within the space industry that is having challenges with that reliability of suppliers. And because we're talking about sending satellites into space, or maybe even humans into space, there's got to be a security component of those suppliers. So what it does is it shrinks the actual options that are out there to be able to buy some of these raw materials and grab some of these components to actually build. And that's why it's forcing them to redesign, I believe, as well.
Yeah. And with these components typically going into space, there's not a lot of people doing it. They're high precision.
Right.
It takes a lot of quality, and it's not like a huge volume business necessarily either. So you need companies that are doing some government defense, some space, but also have a commercial aspect of it so that they're diversified. And even some of the government and space contracts, they're less consistent. Sometimes political moves do also change funding as well. And some of these suppliers, it becomes like a financial risk for them.
Absolutely.
So I'm usually making sure that some of our vendors, like what percent of your business is space and launch, and are they diversified enough? And making sure we're checking like their DMB ratings, how are they trending, what is their funding?
Yeah.
Definitely looking for red flags.
And I don't know if I would assume they use fuel. Like, this is probably like a dumb thing, but I was talking with MVK on the margins just a couple of weeks ago to WestJet, and they were talking about the security of the fuel for the airplanes and how there's only a few suppliers that they can go to for that fuel because of the security, because there's, a human element to having the fuel in that plane and being able to move people to different locations. And so it's absolutely fascinating, the different components that the space industry is thinking about, the aviation industry is thinking about, that we travel on planes all the time, but we don't necessarily think about the fuel supply chain and how secure that needs to be and where they're buying that fuel from. So I highly recommend, if you did not check out that episode of On the Margins, go and check it out. It's on the Let's Talk Supply Chain YouTube. All right, we do need to get to our second article here. So this article is about the American dynamism. And they're talking about, they give a scenario in 2027 if supply chains were to break down, and a few scenarios were to happen. And it's interesting to see our reliance on supply chains and what it actually would mean for us if some of these things were to come to fruition. And this talks about how 50 companies are coming together to make sure that if any of that does happen, that in at least the United States, you are, making sure that you're insulated from some of these things and still able to carry on. So Nicole, talk to me about this article. You brought this one forward, and it's absolutely fascinating. I highly recommend everybody to go check it out in the comments. If you're on my personal LinkedIn, I will update it after the show.
No, I do love to see that VC companies are backing some of these deep tech, hard tech that are important for the nation, for security, and really identifying that there is those long-term risks and gaps there today in the American supply chain, whether it's our manufacturing capability, our supply chain capabilities, and even space and defense side as well. But you can see there's a lot of industries out there where there are clear gaps, and like you said too, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of funding, it takes a lot of time. So it's good to see it's being called out now. So, we can start to get ahead of it in some areas before it does become a more crippling issue, because we are dependent on a global economy right now that in certain situations we may not be available to us.
Yeah. So some of the things I want to call out, and then I want to ask you about them. So what they talked about is how critical satellites are to keeping supply chains running. And they were talking about autonomous vessels. And if one route was down for whatever reason, that those autonomous vessels could then find potentially another route to get the product to where it needs to go. But they would have to be communicating with satellites up in space to be able to do that. And that's why the satellites are so critical for us at the moment. They also talked about how nearshoring isn't necessarily just a nice to have, but it's also essential for the fight of the future. And Nicole, I wanted to ask you about that, but also it talks about self-sustaining supply chains. And I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that as well. So maybe if you could talk about the nearshoring and then the self-sustaining supply chains.
Yeah, I agree that it is a requirement for some key sectors, and the government does outline that in some areas. Like for space with SpaceX, we were at ITAR. So for a majority of the components, you can't buy from certain countries. Like there was no China, obviously no Russia, no sanctioned countries, but majority needed to be domestic, or we needed to provide some kind of reasoning or justification why those materials or precursors couldn't possibly be manufactured in the US, because they believed they were so important to national security that we couldn't import them. And there's definitely certain designs and drawings that we don't kind of want floating around the world. But beyond like space components, there are critical things for our infrastructure that we do need to have control over. If there were an event where we couldn't, it would be handicapping. And I think like during the pandemic, in some cases, we felt that there wasn't enough domestic supply, and it required us to like quickly stand up domestic supply chains, which I think supply chain I've heard like the most than any other time, which was cool to see. But it really showed how much time and money and resources it takes to really bring that all in house. So you do see the governments, VCs investing more, which is good to start building it up. And it we also need to stand up the humans, the workforce, because today there isn't necessarily the workforce trained and ready to take those jobs on now.
Absolutely. And I didn't realize through this article how closely related space and supply chains actually are, especially from a communication standpoint. All right, so let's get to our last article. Now, you might be wondering what this has to do with what we're talking about today. Well, if you went and read the last article that we were talking about, they talk about how essential energy is to the fight of the future. And when I read this article, this talks about how we can use unused space in supply chains like train tracks and turn them into solar power plants, which will then give us self-sustaining energy and provide more energy into our households and things like that. And it got me thinking, right? What other unused parts of supply chains can we use to create some of that energy? And so I thought it was really fascinating, and I thought it was, well pointed to talk about in this conversation today. Nicole, what did you think about this article?
I loved it. I thought it was creative. I love that we're using space that's all already available. This is something that you could scale across multiple different countries and relatively low cost to actually implement if you're looking at a full solar field in comparison. So I was excited about it. They did mention that the US was interested in maybe in 3 years trying it out after there's more tests on it. There was concerns in the removability of it. How durable would this be? But it's not going to solve necessarily some of our energy crises or really decarbonize them with the amount of energy you would be getting off of it. But I like the idea, and there's probably more of these low hanging fruit that would help us chip away at some of the problem. I would say I'm seeing less people investing in the solar space as far as energy goes. I think nuclear is where I'm seeing a lot more startups pop up that I think are exciting. But I have seen someone doing solar reflect orbital. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. They're looking at putting mirrors in space to reflect the sunlight down at Earth when the sun isn't there. So you would be able to use your solar panels all day. So there's definitely a lot of innovation happening in that space, and very exciting.
I wonder if that would light it up though. Right? If it's at night, I wonder if we would have these weird beams of light. But anyways, and then you're going to have conspiracy theorists all over the place. Going back to the article though, 100 meters of solar panels that they are testing out, and they are removable, which allows for the maintenance. So just a couple of things to think about, but we do generate a ton of energy in a variety of ways in supply chain, right? If you think about it. We have planes that are moving. We've got trains that are moving. We've got boats and vessels that are moving. How else can we use some of this unused space, maybe unused energy? How else can we use that to provide some of the energy that we need? These solar panels, I just want to read it here, 1 billion kilowatt hours of solar a year, which powers 300,000 households. So, I mean, it's a considerable amount considering that's only 100 meters. If we think about how much the length of the train tracks maybe across North America and Europe and all over the world, if it works,
And I think it would be fast to implement, because typically with some of these larger solar projects, there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of permitting and time it takes to it, but you already have the train companies locked in its usable space. I think it'd be fast to deploy.
Yeah. Well, anyways, that's all the time that we have for today. This was really great. Nicole, I am so glad that we had you on the show today. You and I only met just a few months ago. And when we did meet, I was like, we need to have you on the show. And we made it happen. I'm so glad that we did. Thank you so much to everybody who... Yeah. Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in this week. Next week, Audrey Ross is back in the hot seat, and we get to hear some of the market updates from her. So, Nicole, thanks again for joining us.